as Ohio State and Notre Dame get ready to square off in the national championship game, the first 12-team college football playoff. It's been 88 years since the Irish have beaten the Buckeyes. Will that change this year? We'll find out on Monday. But I want to take you back to that game in 1936, paint the picture for you, recap it. A lot happened that year in college football and in this matchup, and we'll tell you about it next.
This is Distant Replay.
Welcome into Distant Replay. I am Ben George, taking you back to this 1936 Notre Dame-Ohio State game because, look, it was the last time the Irish beat the Buckeyes. Hard to believe, but these teams haven't faced off that much through the years. Just 8 times total, and Ohio State currently riding a 6-game winning streak with a chance to make that 7 straight in the biggest one yet, the national championship matchup between these two, which will take place in Atlanta. It is the College Football Playoff 2025, and it should be a good one. Ohio State, an 8.5-point favorite in that game. Doesn't really matter too much what happened in the past leading up to this. I think Ohio State clearly the favorite this week. But I wanted to take you back, rewind the clock a little bit, and tell you a little bit about that matchup in which Notre Dame, the last time the Irish did beat Ohio State. Before we do that, let's go back to the year prior, 1935. That was the first meeting between the Buckeyes and the Irish, and at the time, it was dubbed the game of the century. Now, how many times have we heard that since? A lot of games have gotten that title. I don't know if this was the first one, probably not, but at the time was dubbed the game of the century. These two teams squared off in 1935 in front of 80,000-plus fans in Ohio. Irish came back from down 13-0 in that game to win 18-13 thanks to 2 touchdowns in the final 5 minutes. And you can actually go back to YouTube and find that game in 1935. There's 35 minutes of footage thanks to Notre Dame that's archived and on YouTube. It's pretty wild to watch the way that game was played compared to now. Obviously, the forward pass, a much different element of the offenses back then, but pretty cool to watch that footage from nearly 90 years ago. Now, in 1936, to kind of set the stage for college football that year, the AP poll, which we know is kind of the standard in football today, well, at the time, the AP poll had rolled out a couple of polls the previous couple of years, but this was going to be the first year in 1936 that they would actually debut a poll in the middle of the season and then roll out weekly polls. Now, they didn't actually roll out the first one until October 20th, 1936. 35 writers listed their choice for the top 10 teams. Points were tallied based on 10 for first, 9 for second, etc. And they had a 20-team AP poll at that time. I think some of us would probably enjoy going back to a mid-season debut for the polls based on how things shake out. Obviously, it's a big business with preseason polls, conversations, media talk, and the like. But at the time, that's when it debuted. And then it would eventually become the first time the AP poll would crown a national champion. We'll tell you more about that in just a second. So in 1936, now there are a couple stories out there that you can still go back and reference. Not a lot on this game to be found, but this was a rematch, obviously from the year prior, chance for Ohio State to bounce back after that tough defeat the year before. Coming into this game, Ohio State, this 1936 team, coached under Francis Schmidt in his 3rd season in the Big Ten, had destroyed NYU in the opener 60-0, but then lost to Pittsburgh 6-0, and then lost at Northwestern 14-13. Now, keep in mind, these teams weren't ranked at the time because the poll hadn't debuted, but Northwestern would be, and Pittsburgh, both very good teams that season. The week before playing Notre Dame, Ohio State squared off and beat Indiana 7-0 in Ohio. So they came in 2-2. Not a pretty tough schedule early on, a couple wins, maybe not against anybody special. Now, on the other side of that, the 1936 Notre Dame team was coached by Elmer Layden, again, in his 3rd season. They opened up against Carnegie Tech in Notre Dame, won that one 21-7, beat Washington 14-6, then beat Wisconsin 27-0 before falling to Pitt. Now, at the time, Pitt number 9, they had finally debuted their first rankings. Pitt came in at number 9 and beat Notre Dame 26-0 in Pittsburgh in that game, and that led us into the matchup with Ohio State. So both teams kind of coming in on shaky ground. Now, according to the Notre Dame Scholastic Weekly Campus News Magazine, which you can find online, they have a story about this game. The 55,000, now anywhere between 50 and 55,000 reported in this game. That was the most ever that had made their way in for a game inside Notre Dame Stadium. And I thought it was pretty surprising at the time, right? Notre Dame obviously still a very good program, one of the top in this era. They are now still too, but they were clearly at the height of things back in the 30s, having won some championships prior to that. But I looked at the schedule, the attendance in the first 3 home games to kick off the year, 15,000, under 10,000 in that second matchup against Washington, and then 16,000 and change against Wisconsin. So you're talking about those first 3 games combined didn't match what we would see here in this one against Ohio State. Over 50,000 people would make it in. So pretty wild to kind of see how that played out. Now, in this game, Ohio State scored first. They got on the board with a safety. Now, according to the story by the UP, Ohio State blocked a punt in the second quarter to take that lead 2-0. But the reporting is odd because if you go into that Notre Dame Scholastic edition from November 13th, which reports on this game, here's the paragraph that they describe how Ohio State scored. And I read it about 10 times. Can't completely make sense of what they're trying to say here. Ohio State scored first, capitalizing on a fumble early in the second period. From near his own goal line, Miller, on a fake kick, broke through the line only to lose the ball when he was tackled hard by the Scarlet secondary. Ohio State registered a first down, but was then stopped with a touchdown in sight. A safety was good for 2 points, and the Irish were trailing 2-0. No clue how that explains how the safety took place. Doesn't even make sense. It sounds like Ohio State had the ball at the time, but according to the UP, of course, it was a blocked punt that made it 2-0. Now, not a lot of fireworks in this game, as you would probably expect from games of this time, but this one even more so. Notre Dame would answer again in the second period. 4-yard touchdown run by junior halfback Nevin McCormick would make the game 7-2, and that would be the final score. So the last time Notre Dame won, 1936, a 7-2 game. Not a lot took place in this matchup in front of 50,000 plus, but still a big win for Notre Dame. The Irish, the rest of the season, were up and down. So they went from that game in which they beat Ohio State. It vaulted them to 13th in the country. Then they went to play Navy, lost 3-0, bounced out of the top 20 the following week. Went and played Army, won that game 20-6 in the Bronx, bounced back up to number 11 in the polls to face Northwestern, who was number 1 at the time, in late November, and Notre Dame would win that game 26-6, and a huge upset over the top-ranked Northwestern team, and then the Irish would tie USC to close out the season 13-13. The Irish would finish 6-2-1, which wasn't a bad season overall, but still not to their standards. Ohio State on the other side the rest of the way, after starting off 2-3 in those first 5 games, would go on to beat Chicago, Illinois, and the rival Michigan Wolverines by a combined score of 78-0 to close out the season and finish the year 5-3. So for those two teams, nothing spectacular, but a pretty good matchup. 7-2 was the final score for those two. Now, for the season in 1936, Minnesota would actually go on to win the national championship, the first AP number 1 of all time, and they would claim that national championship. And despite the fact that they finished 4-1 in the Big Ten behind Northwestern that finished 6-0 actually in the conference, but Minnesota, who lost at Northwestern earlier in the season 6-0, did enough that year, including 5 shutout wins, to earn the number 1 spot from the AP. So, hey, there's been controversy in the polls dating back as far as the AP poll has gone, as you can see. So, a look back at this 1936 matchup, the last time Notre Dame beat Ohio State in football. These two teams would not play after this 1936 season until 1995. So, pretty surprising these two teams haven't met more. If you aren't familiar with this rivalry or this matchup, the history of this series, you would think they'd probably have squared off a lot more, as much as Notre Dame has history with the Big Ten and a lot of those top teams. Not as much with Ohio State. The Irish trail 6-2 in that series, but a chance to win the biggest matchup yet between these two coming up in this national championship game. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't subscribed to the show, please do so. We appreciate the support as always. My pick for the national championship, in case you're interested, I think Ohio State rolls over Notre Dame, just playing too well. It's been a great season for the Irish, but I think the Buckeyes are too strong, too talented, and playing too well right now to lose this matchup.